Good evening and welcome tonight to our Monday night program on Globespan 24x7. We want to thank all our viewers for joining in tonight. We want to thank Nohar Singh for allowing us to use this platform, and of course, Devin, our technical specialist. Tonight, we are talking about Parliament, constitutional reform, and good governance. Now, we'll be able to capture all of that tonight. We don't know, but we'll try our best to ensure that we can give you as much as possible as we go through the program tonight. To help us tonight will be no stranger to us, of course, Mr. Timothy Jonas. We know is the chairman of ANOG. He's a senior counsel in Guyana, and he is one of the prolific young, vibrant leaders that Guyana look forward to in the future. We also will be, soon we'll have with us Mr. Manzoor Nadir, the Speaker to the National Assembly. He'll be on shortly, and he will also help us to carry us through. And also tonight is, of course, no stranger to us again, Dr. Euclid Rose, professor here at CUNY. He lectures to the graduate and the doctoral program in political science. So gentlemen, welcome to the program tonight.
Thank you, Charles. Good to be here.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks.
Okay. What I want to do tonight is, and I listened to the program last Wednesday. It was very, informative. But as we mentioned, I know Mr. Jonas mentioned, let us move on and talk of solutions. But like everything else in our age group, I guess we can't forget the past to make decisions for the future. But as we rightly know, those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. So when Tim asked us to move forward, I think tonight, hopefully we can move forward. But we would like to hear tonight, gentlemen, of possible pathways for Guyana and her children, where we want to discuss the local content in our natural resources, crafting a professional public service. And this is not restricted to the civil service as we know it as is, but in terms of the army, the police, the firemen, and so on. As you know, Sharma, our great son of Guyana, he said, a story has three sides. Maybe it's time we have a Truth and a Reconciliation Commission. And I was going to ask the speaker that if the speaker can initiate that discussion with the leader of the House, the Prime Minister, and also the President, so we can actually have that discussion, maybe craft a bill so everyone will be exempt from any fines or any penalty of imprisonment for coming forward and speaking the truth. We want to hear the unadulterated truth of what transpired in the past. Once we know that and it's historical, it will give us, I think, a breathing space to move forward. Think of hearing from people like Hamilton Green, Donald Ramutar, Mrs. Ratcliffe, Isi Kwayana, David Granger, Ralph Ramkaran, Robert Corbyn, Mrs. Arjun, Freddie Kissoon, you name it. We have the people there that they have so much to talk about the past, and we want them to speak it without the threat of imprisonment or whatever they did. So I hope that we can have this moving. So tonight, gentlemen, I really want us to talk about the way forward. Let's leave the past for that Reconciliation Commission. So Tim, I know you initiated that discussion last Wednesday, but I don't think you guys got very far with it. In your view, what would you see would be some of the stepping stones that need to be put in place for us to have a new vision for the future?
You said two interesting things. People who don't look at the past are condemned to repeat it. You don't learn from the past, you're condemned to repeat it. And I can give you some very specific examples. In 2015, GPL was run by a competent man called Baradindia. who was seen as a PPP supporter. And therefore, when the government changed in 2015, he was promptly removed and replaced with an APNU supporter. In 2015, NISIL was run by a competent man called Brassington, who was a PPP supporter. So when the government changed, he was promptly removed and replaced by an APNU supporter, Horace James. And then later on by the gentleman who's now in trouble, Calvin Heath. And then in 2020, having not learned from the past, all of those APNU supporters in GPL and NISIL, government changed and they were all promptly replaced. So you now have PPP supporters back running all of those shops all over again because none of us learned from the past. And therefore we are repeating it. So if the government changes in 5 years again, all the policies, all the strategies, all the institutional memory gets thrown out the window and you start putting back your family and your friends. So solution number one is that these organizations need to be run by boards that are appointed, comprising members of both sides, and those boards, the board of NISIL, the board of Energy Agency, the board of GPL, the board of GAIWA, appointed from members of the opposition and members of government. The board must appoint the CEO and the management of all those state corporations, all those organizations, all those agencies. And if that happens, that's a solution for you. Then even when there's a change in government, you won't have that cleansing, that ethnic cleansing of every single management level in central housing, in NISIL, and all the state institutions. You won't have those hollow shouts of congratulations when your friend is appointed CEO of this board, when you know full well that he's a government lackey and got the job, got the position because of that. You want professionals to do professional jobs, and for that to happen, they have to be appointed by a board that is representative of all sides of the House of Parliament. And that's one solution I have for you immediately. The legislation was contemplated that.
Great solution, actually. Are you saying also, if you don't mind, that the board should straddle 5 years of the government? The government is generally elected. I know. Welcome, Mr. Speaker. I see your mute is on, Mr. Speaker. So you'll have to take out your mute. But what I'm saying, Tim, is that should the board straddle 5 years? So instead of, if the government appoint them in the year in which the government is in office, should that go for 6 years, for instance, or 3 years, and then another board established after 3 years go to another 3 years, and those should also have a parliamentary approval?
I don't think it matters, Charles. I think once the government can appoint two and the opposition can appoint two, it doesn't matter how long the appointment is for. When their time is up, if it's a year or 2 years or 3 years, it's still the government appointing two and the opposition appointing two. But you want the entire country represented on these boards. You don't just want half the country represented.
And should Parliament get involved in those board?
Well, most of these organizations are creatures of Parliament. So central housing is created by Parliament. The Petroleum Board is created by Parliament. And I can give you fair warning now, Manzoor, that if I ever have what AFC had, which was a swing vote in Parliament, the laws I would immediately be implementing would be amendments to the Central Housing Act, to the EPA Act, to the Guyana Energy Agency Act, mandating that those boards are represented, two from the opposition as well as two from government.
All right. Mr. Speaker, welcome.
Mr. Sugrim, my apologies to you, your guests, and your viewers for being a bit tardy.
That's okay.
It's a pleasure once again to be with you on Globespan. And I want to say that next time, if you have me back, I endeavor to be the first signing in.
You're looking very immaculate. Don't worry, you're looking very good. When we start the program as a speaker, we are thinking tonight of having solutions, and Tim just mentioned one very important one is to have independent boards represented by both the government and the opposition in equal number. And then maybe the board will, I don't know how the chairman will come up, but I preempt that by saying that Mr. Sharma, I think your daughter's father-in-law, he made a very important statement that a story has three sides. And as the speaker, I was asking if you can initiate a proposal with the leader of the House, which is the Prime Minister, and of course the President, for us to have that bill to set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And we hope that President Ali can actually do that. And in that Reconciliation and Truth Commission, people can speak their unadulterated truth of the past. We are hearing stories from everyone about the past, but they're all convoluted, and who tell the story, they tell it the way they want to present it, whether it's the truth or not. But if we have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and people are exempt from getting penalty of perjury, or they don't go to prison, it's possible they can speak the truth of what happened. And I'm talking about men like Hamilton Green and Isi Koyana and Donald Ramutar and David Granger, Ralph Ramkaran, and all those other people who have so much of the history of Guyana in their head, but we need to publish it, the unadulterated truth. Will you, as the speaker, initiate that discussion to have that bill in place so we can have that commission going under President Ali?
Just a reminder to everyone, in our Westminster parliamentary system, the speaker generally does not initiate bills. Bills will come from the floor. I remember the history of Parliament was after the House of Commons was established and the Magna Carta signed off by the King appointed a speaker to preside over the hearings of the House of Commons. And then whatever the House of Commons, i.e. the people decided, the speaker's job was to take it back to the Crown. And if the Crown did not like what the speaker was saying, he would literally say, "Off with his head." That's why people used to say, when you go to the Crown, hold on to your head, because you literally lost your head. And so that tradition of the speaker being a representative of the Crown, in this case, we have a president, a government. The speaker tends to be a person who would mediate between the discussions in Parliament, who would be another arm of the state to add some checks and balances in the system. But where the initiation of bills are concerned, you have those coming from the floor of the House. And so the government ends up being the main proposer, but other members of Parliament from the other side can initiate bills, and even private citizens can petition the Parliament to have bills. So these are all instruments which are at the disposal of a democracy and the people within that democracy. And so I don't have to initiate it, but there are so many other ways in which such a bill can be initiated and a national conversation engaged on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well said. I think thanks for the history lesson as well. I didn't know that was the history of the speaker. But Tim started the discussion with proposal for the future. And Dr. Rose, you want to join in there?
Yes, this is Globespan Television coming to you live from New York City, and I want the audience to know this. Our appreciation to its CEO, Mr. Noor Singh, and its technical director, Kevin Bissoon. And thanks to all our viewers here in New York, in Guyana, in the Caribbean, and around the world. I want to just chart a different course here. Mr. Speaker, good evening. I'm
Good
Dr.
evening.
Rose. There have been many speakers in Parliament before you, the last one being Scotland. How are you different from the other speakers in your pronunciation of your duties? If so, why and how?
I can speak of the standing orders, the rules that govern how we operate within the National Assembly, and I can speak to how Manzoor Nadir would want to apply those rules. First, standing orders, which are the rules of Parliament, they dictate our behavior. And the standing orders are online and available for everyone to see. So the speaker has his confines, and that is within the rules. But in terms of the management of the affairs of the National Assembly and the way in which we can bring the National Assembly closer to the people and the people closer to the National Assembly, I think I do have some amount of wiggle room. And in that regard, I want to be on an aggressive program to let our citizens know what is the function and the role of the National Assembly in a democracy. What are the functions of members of Parliament in the National Assembly? I also feel that being one of the important arms of the state, the legislative arm of the state, we also have an obligation to extend our work to propagate good democratic principles that Guyana has, is building, will build to the international community. And in this regard, I have, I would say, been a bit aggressive. I don't know how aggressive previous speakers would have been with respect to the international affairs agenda of the National Assembly. But I will tell you that I see this as an opportunity to build the image of Guyana and Guyanese, to build the image of our parliamentary system, and to build the image of our democracy. In this regard, in the last month, Guyana has been elected to the Interparliamentary Union Planning Committee for the next IPU convention. The IPU is 150 years old. That's the parliament, a parliamentary grouping of parliaments from around the world. And only on Friday, we have been elected as one of the 5 South American countries to sit on the council, the board of governors of the what is called Parliamericas. That's the parliamentary grouping of the OS countries. So now we have an additional responsibility. Today, I engaged in another discussion with respect to the parliaments of the countries of Amazonia, all those countries touched by the Amazon forest. And there's an initiative from Brazil to bring those countries closer and to have greater cooperation among the parliament and the parliamentarians of Amazonia. And today, we have also been trying to build and cement our bilateral arrangements. Today, I spoke with His Excellency, the Speaker, Marinus B. of Suriname, who is, like me, beginning his first stint as Speaker. So this international affairs agenda will be an aggressive one under my watch because there are so much we can benefit from each other. It's not about us speaking to other parliaments and other countries about what we can get, but what we can share. And in this regard, I received His Excellency Ambassador Patricio Becker from Chile this afternoon. And in our discussions, Chile is going through a tough time for the last few months since, I think, October, with a lot of mass demonstrations. And Chile has been has had a very torrid history when it comes to the kind of democracy we have in Guyana, the Caribbean, and the Commonwealth. And so I was saying to Ambassador, we have a small country. Yes, we have some hiccups at elections time, but by and large, Guyana can share with Chile some of its experiences with respect to unity and diversity. And we've been working in that regard. So you'll see an aggressive program from me with respect to promoting the work of the National Assembly. And let me just tell people, sometimes when we say National Assembly and we say Parliament, we use them synonymously. The Parliament comprises the President and the National Assembly. So that is the law-making function of the state. The National Assembly, meaning where all the members of Parliament sit, they would pass bills and pass motions. For a bill to become law, the President has to assent to it. So that is the difference between Parliament and National Assembly. I can speak for the National Assembly.
Okay. Since independence, how long that was? 54 years ago. And Tim, I want you to weigh in on this first, and then you after, Mr. Speaker. We have not had a female Speaker of the House or of Parliament. Mr. Jonas, do you think it's time for us to have one?
Funny, you changed the subject there, Euclid, and that's
I am.
Interesting.
I'm coming back to what we discussed before, but I want to get these things out first.
No, I'm happy to answer your question, but I sat down for, I think it was about 5 minutes, and I heard Manzoor. If you ask me to tell you what Manzoor said, I can't. I heard about Chile, and I heard about great things.
No, that's not my question, though.
No, I don't believe in affirmative action. I don't believe in subsidization. I don't believe in Guyana that we need to make any special effort to say, oh, you need a woman in this position, or you need this kind of person in that position. We already have the experience in Guyana. We're lucky that way. We've had a female president. We've got a female chancellor. We've got a female chief justice. We had a female chancellor, Desiree Bernard, way back when. Some of our most prolific, most competent, most reliable professionals in our top positions are women. Why do you want to jump down some foreign concept of affirmative action to say we need a woman in this position? One will come. And when she comes, she will do the job better than all the others have done it, and power to her. But don't let us be patronizing by sitting here smugly to say, oh, we need to have a woman do this, and we need to make space for a woman as if they need some kind of special help to get up there. They don't need the help to get up there. One will get there when the time comes.
Okay, Mr. Speaker.
Doc, I share the view, like Timothy, merit should propel a person, not gender. Merit.
No, I'm not saying gender. I'm saying based on merit, because there are a lot of qualified women in Guyana who can be speakers today. Well, so I'm not talking about affirmative action, as Tim is saying, or I'm basing this on merit myself.
And qualification has so many different variables. But I will say this. Sometimes we beat ourselves up too much. Our parliament has a provision that, I shouldn't say the parliament, our election laws has a provision that 1/3 of the candidates that are vying on a list should be female. It's a big start. And what I've noticed is that since we have put that provision in place, the parties who are selecting their members of parliament try to ensure we have that same kind of representatives in parliament. The recognition is that, yes, we have to puncture some holes in the status quo to allow opportunities to flow to all groups. And even recently, the declaration we signed off in Parliamericas, it spoke to the issue of ensuring that we can create more opportunities for females in our political system. But when you look around, you will see how far the other genders have come. And that question, pose that question to the great democracy you live in, and they have not had a female president, right? They've had a female speaker, yes, and now a vice president. So let's create opportunities, but do not let us legislate behavior.
Okay. Now, Mr. Speaker, there's a question for you here. Over the years, the PNC, the PEP, and now recently APNU have boycotted Parliament time and again. Would you support the idea that those who boycotted Parliament should have their pay deducted for the time boycotted?
No, I don't. Because people look at attending a sitting of Parliament as your work in Parliament, and it is not. It is not. You have every single day a member of Parliament steps out of his home and he speaks to someone, he has to represent them. The work starts. Every morning you wake up, every telephone call you take from a citizen. When you participate in committee, the amount of research that you have to do to participate in those committee discussions, consulting with your constituents and even your political party, because we do have a list system, it's a tremendous amount of work. I think the question should now be, shouldn't we have properly paid members of parliament with constituency budgets to enable them to better represent their constituents?
Okay. Now, Tim, what have you to say about that? Have you got anything to add to that, Tim?
If Parliament was indeed a body that whose individual members represented constituencies in a recognizable way, I would agree fully with what Manzoor is saying. But I think we all know, the whole of Guyana knows, that if government has more than half of the seats in Parliament at any one time, then Parliament is nothing but a rubber stamp. And you can twist it or turn it, but that's how it is. Once the government of the day has the majority seats in Parliament, then Parliament is there to implement laws to sustain the elected dictatorship that we have, and Parliament has no independent autonomous voice. The one time that that did not happen and that someone crossed the floor in a meaningful way, he had to leave the country hurriedly the next day because he was afraid for his life. And years later, there's still shouts on the road of the traitor Charandas. Although he did what I think the AFC should have done many, many months before he stepped out and did it by himself. So we've had that experience under each government in turn, that once the government has the majority in Parliament, of the 65 people, all should stay home except one. That one who makes the difference in terms of a vote. And he can come and vote the government's line and go back home and save us all the money. Parliament is only a real institution if the government has a minority, because that's the only time that it is truly an independent, autonomous body. And that's what we need in Guyana. We need it to be peopled in a way that the government of the day, whoever the government is, only has a minority. Otherwise, I'm sorry, but you can twist it or turn it, pretty it up, nice it up, it's a rubber stamp.
Charles, over to you.
Thank you, Doc. Gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, you became a member of the governing board of this enlarged body of speakers or parliaments around at least North, Central, and South America, and I think it might have spread to other areas. What are some of the things you expect to learn from them? And I'm glad you mentioned the history of the speakership. And if you, I'm sure you listened to the Speaker of the British Parliament. It's a firebrand, you know. He's very entertaining. The last one, I'm not sure this one so much, but the last one was very entertaining. Would you kind of have some of those features in your parliament as speaker, and what other speakers are doing that will help you to make your job a pathway that was, you know, you prepare your own destiny as a Speaker of the National Assembly?
Charles, I think you know me for decades. And you know, like a lot of other persons, all of us have some very strong positions, some very principled, strong positions. I expect to ensure that we can have a lively parliament, that we can keep members of parliament on their toes, but more particularly that we can continue to capture the interests of the younger people in decision making in our country. And we've had a great start in these elections because it's the young people, the Timothy Jonases and the Ray Lamb and all of those. I'm talking to some of the faces just emerged. They have really carried the public relations of the democratic process forward in these last 8 months. So those actions there, when you look at the viewership of the sessions in Parliament when it started, it's perhaps been the highest we've had. And so it has really initiated a lot of interest among younger people of all sides, and I think we need to capitalize on that. So yes, Parliament shouldn't be seen as a place that passes laws to benefit interest groups, but should be a place where you can start practicing influencing decisions in between these 5 years. While Timothy has his own opinion, I have a different experience with respect to the dictatorship of the cabinet. In the Westminster system, it is said that you have dictatorship of the cabinet. But in the country where we had the cradle of the Westminster system, cabinet dictatorship does not hold. That's why you have so many different rebellions within Parliament in Britain, in England, in the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, you have many instances of no dictatorship of cabinet. And so when members of the cabinet have strong views and they can reconcile into consensus, you do have people speaking their mind. Look at who is the president in Suriname right now. Was at one time justice minister, didn't like what was going on, left, and ended up prosecuting his president. So we can always be cynical and say that it's dictatorship of one person, it's dictatorship of the cabinet. But my experiences in these last 4 decades of being in public life and in representative democracy, and I can say representative democracies from Guyana all the way down up to Bermuda, integrally. And I've seen many instances of differences. Yes, Doc, we're 54 years old, whatever. It's a short time. It's a short time. We're going to have many hiccups along the way. But sometimes do not let us throw away the baby with the bathwater and say that we have not achieved anything. We have.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we come back, we want to continue the discussion about constitutional reform, and I think Mr. Jonas will be leading us off on that, and I'm sure the Speaker will have a lot to say of that as well. So when we come back, let's talk about constitutional reform.
Travelspan is pleased to announce that the airport in Guyana is now open. There are flights from New York and Miami non-stop to Guyana. Call Travelspan for all your travel needs to Guyana or for your vacation to Mexico or Punta Cana. Call 718-845-0437. That's 718-845-0437. Flights are now on sale to Guyana and vacation packages are now on sale to Mexico and Punta Cana. Call 718-845-0437. Logistics International, based in Trinidad with representatives in Guyana, is pleased to announce its shipping services from Trinidad to Guyana. Logistics provides shipping services and has experienced personnel to handle all of your shipping needs from Trinidad to Guyana. Buy in Trinidad and let Logistics handle all of your shipping to Guyana from small boxes to container sizes. Call Logistics in Trinidad at 1-868-336-8218 to handle all of your shipping needs, and they handle all sizes. Logistics International has been shipping for over 22 years to many Caribbean countries with reliability and dependability. Call 1-868-336-8218 in Trinidad. That's 1-868-336-8218. Or email at liclcargo@gmail.com.
Welcome back to our program tonight, and we have with us the Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly, Honorable Manzoor Nadir. We have Mr. Timothy Jonas, the Chairman of ANUG, and of course, Dr. Rose, my co-host. Gentlemen, there's a lot of discussion about our Constitution, and I was reading a letter in one of the APNU guys who wrote recently saying that the PNC did, up to AFC, did more than the PPP in this period of time in their government. And he mentioned, one of the things he mentioned was that there was the constitutional amendment bill that was passed in Parliament. I mean, but I think that's a big joke because the bill was passed. I think some work was done, a report given to the Prime Minister, and it's somewhere getting dust. Mr. Jonas, I asked the Vice President this in our last meeting with him, and I said, should there be a new constitution, or are we talking about constitutional reform? In your opinion, what should we have?
Well, you're quite right to criticize the APNU leadership over the last 5 years for doing absolutely nothing in that regard. They had campaigned before 2015 on a platform of constitutional reform. They had said that they would get off the ground within their first 100 days. They manifestly failed to do that. And in fact, ANUG was created after we sent a letter to the then incumbent AFC to say, you made this promise, we were all AFC supporters, we're not seeing constitutional reform. Instead, you're enjoying all of the benefits of sole power. You've made no overtures to the PPP in terms of having a fair system where both sides are represented. And unless you change that, we will go to the people ourselves. ANUG was created because AFC didn't respond. ANUG was created because of the failure of APNU to implement the constitutional reform promises that they made. Now, again, the PPP are here. We will see that they are enjoying all of the benefits of leadership. And I don't expect to see much done on constitutional reform. I do expect to see a lot of lip service. So there'll be a lot of talk, and there may be people flying here and there and consulting with, you know, this village and that village and that kind of thing. I don't expect to see much done. If I'm pleasantly surprised and something is done, I think the first thing is we got to look at our existing constitution. You don't fix things in a revolutionary way, you evolve. I think that's always the safest thing to do. So you take what you have and you identify the things you don't like about it and you change those. I think that one half of our constitution can be scratched out as just being meaningless verbiage, designed to obscure, designed to introduce red herrings, and to hide from the reality, the bare bones of what people want to know about. I'll give you an example. The Constitution says that we are in transition to socialism. We've been that way for the last 40 years. That's verbiage. That doesn't mean anything to anybody in Guyana. The Constitution says land to the tiller. More verbiage. No obligation is imposed on anybody. You don't have land, and if you did, it doesn't go to the tiller. So when you take a document and you make it 300 pages, and of that 150 pages is that kind of unreadable gobbledygook, you are not making it something that can be appreciated by the ordinary people out there. The ordinary people out there want to know their rights are. They want to know how they elect their representative. They want to know how their representative gets into parliament. And they want to know what right of access they have. Most Guyanese don't know that. If you ask your Guyanese on the road, who is your representative in parliament, he doesn't have a clue. If you ask him how is the mayor elected in Georgetown, do you vote for him? He doesn't have a clue. Our systems are so opaque because of the unwieldy and large and verbose nature of the legislation and the constitutional structures that it defeats itself. It becomes unintelligible. So for me, the first thing to do is simplify it, cut it down to bare bones, get rid of the verbiage, and let's try and make this thing understandable to people so that they know what their rights are, they know what the institutions are, they know what they can expect from their leaders. Right now, very few people know those things.
Mr. Speaker?
It's Timothy is correct. A lot of those statements in the preamble of the Constitution should be discarded. But we cannot do it because a handful of do-gooders feel it should be done. It has to go through a consultative process. And I went through the last one, where the Speaker was concerned. The Speaker became the chairman of the Constituent Assembly that first started looking. It's going to be a long process. You know, I just learned from Chile that they have now a 2-year time frame for such reforms. It's going to be long, and a lot has to come out of it. We are no society in transition from socialism. We all know it. That should be expunged. Personally, I think every person should have a right to a firearm if they want it. That should be a basic right, a firearm. And more particularly, the electoral system has been open for much debate. And there is a strong view that we should have a system of constituencies and proportional representation. 30 years ago, in fact, I have 2 publications that I had a collection of views on changing, on constitution reform. And the best system that I have seen is the German system, which has constituencies, but at the final count, the votes that you get must reflect your national proportion. So there is a top-up. But I can still go to Parliament and call someone and say, who is my representative for South Georgetown? And they will tell me it's Manzoor Nadir. We can't do that. You'll hear who is a regional MP here, but I believe we need to have this hybrid system of identifying constituencies and ensuring that we have proportional representation. There's another view I have also. In the German system, if you don't get a minimum threshold, I think it's 5% of the national votes, you do not get a seat. And that cuts out the nuisance parties from it. So the big thing that people talk about in constitutional reform, the buzz phrases are reducing the power of the president, and the other one is constituency representatives. And our constitution doesn't need to go through an entire evolution. In fact, there are provisions in the constitution that we can, even without much delay, allocate up to half of the seats in parliament as constituency seats. But the active politicians, those who are out there having support of people, especially elected to parliament, they need an aggressive agenda to put this to the people. And we have to respect, if you put your views to the people and it's not carried, you have to continue to work to educate your supporters and the people to your view. But not because the majority reject your view, then the majority is stupid, awkward, backward. No. We, like Tim said, we are in an evolutionary process. And we have moved from total constituencies to total proportional representation, and now slowly edging back to a hybrid system of constituencies and national top-up seats. It's been introduced at the local government level. So for me to make the next step to the national level should not be so difficult. But it has to be a consultative process, and not because a handful of us who do-gooders want to do it.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Jonas, and you also, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Jonas, you said that Parliament is a rubber stamp. My question to you is this. What constitutional arrangements would you like to see be made in order to make Parliament not a rubber stamp?
That's a good question and a difficult one. It's not unique. There are 3 or 4 countries around the world that have our problem. But the interesting peculiarity of Guyana is our race demographic. We are on a razor-thin, equally balanced scale where the difference between the PPP party loyalists and the APNU party loyalists, as we have seen, is 10,000 votes. So when Manzoor talks about the nuisance parties, I think that the system he describes is useful for very large countries and countries where there's one demographic. Germany is white. You can't look at a man in Germany or look at a woman in Germany and tell how they're going to vote. We are very different, and we have to accommodate in our electoral system our own reality. Certainly, if we have that razor-thin edge between the Indo party and the Afro party, between PPP and APNU, any third party is immediately a nuisance party. Because if you only got those 2 parties, then the winner is in a very happy place, and the loser holds his breath and grinds his teeth, hoping he'll be the winner next go round, so he can be in a happy place. But you need that third party to make Parliament independent. And therefore, I don't think that you should be shutting out third parties in Guyana, because any third party is a nuisance, a major nuisance to the 2 large parties, especially if they get traction. So our system should be to encourage the small parties, not to keep them out. So when you start implementing measures, as the 2 large parties have agreed enthusiastically to do, first it was a monetary amount. You had to pay a sum of money if you wanted to contest an election. Then you had to go and get 200 signatures of people supporting you from each of the 10 regions. Now Manzoor is talking about a 5% nuisance. Those are designed to keep out the competition, to keep out that dangerous third party that the AFC became. so that this remains a two-horse race. But it's the two-horse race that has really damaged us because we have a two-horse society. And luckily for us, as our middle class grows, as our education level grows, as our exposure to foreign things and what can potentially be achieved in Guyana, as we become more aware of that, there is a small demographic that has rejected that system. And that small demographic, let's call them the nuisance demographic. That nuisance demographic, I think, has the wherewithal and the means and now has the numbers, if they can be unified, to change that system and make Parliament independent. And that's what I see for the future.
You, Mr. Nadir, Speaker.
Yes, experience really is very valuable trait which no amount of knowledge and wisdom can ever overcome. This is not the first time in our history that we have had smaller parties getting 1 or 2 seats. The design of Guyana to a PR system from a first past the post was because the People's Progressive Party used to get a lopsided victory. And when you combined the support of the other 2 parties, then they had more popular votes than the PPP. And so the system was changed. In 1964, running up to the elections, the third party got 7 seats. And we saw that repeat 30 years later, 60 years later, 50 years later, with the Alliance for Change. We saw that repeat. And I want to say here, and Charles, you were around the table at the time, when a proposal was made to the Constitution Reform Commission, that position of getting a minimum threshold of national support before you get into Parliament was in the submission I made. So this is not something that evolved with Manzoor Nadir today. This is something that 20 years ago he submitted to the National Assembly. 20 years ago. The good thing about it is that the verbatim records of those 2 years going into the constitution reform at the turn of the century, those exist. Those exist. So I today stand on firm history and personal conviction and commitment to ensuring that we can have a democracy in this country that takes firm root among people, and people can vote for those who best represent their views or reflect their views. And I think staying faithful to what I have had as my history is an easy thing for me to do.
Here's something. Apart from Canada, which has a third party, Israel, Italy, Germany, and France, and a couple of other countries, 95% of the countries in the world operate in a two-party system. On a two-party system. Now, here's the bad news about third parties in Guyana. They do not last more than 2 election cycles, maximum 3. United 464, 68, and after that it melted. ANC 2006, 2011 merged with APNU. Now it's dissolving itself. So 2 parties, looking at a trend, political trend, they don't last more than 2 election cycles, maximum 3. Having said that, coming back to constitutional reform, Mr. Jonas, and also you, Mr. Speaker, the British bequeathed on us a system called proportional representation, which exists in a few countries and is a good system. But they themselves do have what we don't know for as far as the post or constituency voting. both of you, would any one of you like to see the Constitution amended so as to have constituency voting again, where MPs are represented by their constituents? That's one part of the question. The other part of the question, the Americans, Jimmy Carter and his team, also bequeathed to Guyana a system in GCOM where you have 3 PPP commissioners and 3 PNC commissioners and expect unity, knowing fully well the chair can break the vote. But to both of you, do you think there should be amendments to change those 2 systems? Timothy?
Well, Asquith, again, what you just did is draw comparisons with countries that do not have our race demographic. So that if you go to the States and you spend any time there, you will know, and you are there, and I'm sure you will agree with me, that someone who votes Democrat this time may well vote Republican next time. And if you go to England, someone who votes one way this time may well vote Liberal next time. Not so in Guyana. In Guyana, if you're born Afro, that's how you vote. And if you're born Indo, that's how you vote. Now, I've heard Manzoor talk about experience. He's right. Experience is very important. But I would ask Guyanese, what has our experience taught us? Certainly, our experience cannot have taught us that status quo is the right way to continue. That's not what our experience has taught us. As soon as Mr. Burnham left the PPP and went out on his own and created that rift, which stays with us now, the problem was created. Because of migration, because of births, because of natural causes, by some miracle, the pre-existing majority which the PPP demographic have traditionally enjoyed has been eroded. It's not gone all the way, but it's been eroded. So that at this stage, it's on a knife edge. It's precariously balanced. And that is an opportunity that has not previously existed. I concede your point, Asquith. I concede it, that the last go round with the AFC, we've had an appalling failure. And it is a hard lesson learned. And for me personally, it creates a hard pitch to bowl on. Because I have to say to people like you, yes, the AFC did one pile of nonsense. But that does not mean that we throw our hands up and give up and say, over to you, 2 boys, APNU, PPP, conduct your fight, and we'll stop being a nuisance. That cannot be the solution. And if you agree with me that a 2-party system creates a dictatorship in Parliament and makes Parliament a rubber stamp, if you agree with that, and if you go back to Manzoor's experience, which tells us as Guyanese that Burnham wasn't changing the Constitution when he enjoyed it, and our most honest leader, Chedi, didn't change the Constitution. He wanted it changed before 92. After 92, even he said, nah, I like it so. Certainly, Jagbio, Ramatar, Juranger, in their turn, weren't changing the Constitution when they started enjoying the sweet. So who on earth is going to suggest that if we continue doing what we've been doing all along, by some miracle, some angel is going to go into power and change the Constitution at the expense of his own personal power and personal control? Let us agree, AFC failed and messed up. AFC let all of us down, including me. But our answer to that cannot be to say, let's go back to 2 parties. Our answer has to be to say, if we want an independent Parliament, we need a 3rd party there, and we need to learn from the past and understand what we must expect of this 3rd party going in. AFC proposed not a single piece of legislation independently in all the time it was in there. AFC should have been passing laws, as we discussed earlier, to make those boards autonomous, to make the agencies autonomous. You don't need constitutional reform for that. Let us agree that if the two-party arrangement doesn't work in our two-race society, if we agree that we need something different, the only thing different that is possible as we stand now is a third party to get in there to try to create a swing vote in Parliament and make Parliament independent. We got to keep trying, or else, Asquith, I got to come up to New York and live up there.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Your mute is on. Your mute is on.
I don't believe that we will have a Timothy Jonas coming up and living in New York or London. He will stay.
He's welcome. He's welcome anytime.
No, not that Timothy Jonas. He is going to fight for the things he believes is right, so as to make those changes right here at home.
I agree with that, Manzoor.
I see that happening. No amount of pressure, but this is a democracy is a dynamic process, dynamic, and when we do all the analysis, Asquith, it comes down to 10 to 15% of the people who will swing one way or the other. That will make the change. That will make the change. I don't agree with Timothy because all the people in Germany, they're white, and so the threshold of votes can apply. If you go to Bavaria, the Christian Democratic Union, the CDU, has been dominating there, and people haven't changed. They haven't changed. So the system in Germany has evolved so that the Christian Democratic Union always have a friendly coalition with the Bavarians. So there's always a two parties in the Bundestag, right? So it's not as simplistic as that. And because of the dynamics and because of people, look, Henry Jeffrey has a lot of views. Henry Jeffrey became part of ANOG. And then all of a sudden, Jeffrey views, to me, a person who I've known to be very principled, throw away the issue of valid votes and counting votes and start talking about a whole lot of other peripheral things when this last election was concerned. But there was unity in ANOG that they're going to fight on the platform of constitution reform. That was the uniting factor. And so those uniting factors change. They change according to time, according to people, and many other factors. So it's a dynamic process and it's evolutionary. Timothy is right. And you're going to have all of these as you keep sifting through the coffee to get the powdery form, to get the granule form. But it's going to take time. One of the things I believe strongly that we have to do is to remain civil to each other, continue the dialogue, and not because we look. Charles was associated with me for a long time. We took decisions Charles didn't agree with, but Charles and I can always and have always sat over a cup of coffee or a lunch, or even in church, and our differences never divided us. Charles has his political start with us, but we had a change and a diverging of views. But if Charles calls me tomorrow, I'd never refuse to take his call. And that is civility I'm speaking about.
Thanks, go ahead.
I just want to give one last example. In the 80s, Manzoor Nadir used to be branded a Reaganite. I proudly wear that label still, right? And in the Caribbean at that time, we had the strong ideological divide still. We had moved from nationalism to capitalism and communism, and then we still had in the 80s the remnants of strong ideological views. There was a a die-in-the-cloth socialist, Earl Bousquet, from St. Lucia. And I campaigned with the United Workers' Party since 1987 in St. Lucia. Because once you're a Commonwealth citizen and you live 1 year in another Commonwealth country, you're entitled to participate, right? And Earl and I would trade swords. Words would clash publicly and privately over ideology. But if I see Earl walking out at the VG airport stretch, I would stop and pick him up. And so when the PPP came into power, Earl Bousquet came to Guyana to work with Dr. Jagan. And Earl wanted to call me. And somebody said to Earl, but he is a capitalist. He is Reaganite. He said, he's my friend. We have different views. Anybody got a number for Manzoor? And that is the kind of civility I think we need to bring to society. If we go to Bermuda, you will see two brothers fighting in two different camps for the same constituency and watching the election results in one home. You go to Bahamas, and on election day, you have that maturity where in the polling place, the colors, the paraphernalia, the election material of the contesting party could be worn and carried. The two tents are right next to each other in front of the polling place. That level of decency, civility is what we need to bring to this country.
I'm glad you said what you said. Now I know who Charles' associates are. Charles, over to you.
All right, before we get into break, I want to ask Tim one question. Tim, you mentioned that the AFC never presented a bill to Parliament to do what we get in the next stage, good governance. You have one seat in Parliament now, even though the seat doesn't necessarily have the weight that AFC had. Would you also now put bills in Parliament through that one seat to get things done? You're on mute. You got to unmute.
I've been watching the new government to see how they evolve. You cannot twist it or turn it, Charles. Manzoor talks about advocating and influence and this kind of thing. 33 seats means Parliament belongs to the PPP. So we can propose, but if the government doesn't like it, too bad. And unless we have a swing vote, we are wasting time. Because any meaningful motion that is passed now to erode that power that is enjoyed by the government will not pass. So as time goes on, you will see we will propose one. And we will explain to the public why it is there and why we think it's a good idea. And it will not pass.
Okay, and as the speaker just said, in my own household, I vote Republican this last election. My son vote Democrat. There's no quarrel, so it's you vote who you want to vote for. You're still friends.
What about your family in Guyana, Charles? Tell me your family in Guyana that your cousin votes one way and her husband votes another way. Tell me that, Charles, and then we can have a conversation.
When I was there, I voted for United Force. My wife voted for PPP. What can I say? That's the reality. When we come back, gentlemen, we will talk about the last part of our program tonight, good governance. And I know Tim started the discussion, and we want to continue that when we come back.
Globespan 24x7 continues its efforts to serve the communities. The platform provides for all sides to air their views and discuss solutions. Viewers in Guyana and across the world are participating in these discussions. Globespan's platform offers Guyanese an opportunity to express their concerns and discuss solutions in the political realm, thereby addressing the polarized situation. Discussions also include social ills, such as alcoholism, domestic violence, and suicides that have been plaguing the people. The Globespan 24x7 platform connects the diaspora and the world with Guyana. So become a supporter of Globespan 24x7 today by clicking the badge icon on the lower right side of your screen. For only $10 a month, you will be a supporter of Globespan 24x7 initiative and have a badge displayed on your Facebook profile. Help us to continue to serve the communities. Cannot travel due to COVID? Then treat yourself or your loved one with a gift. Purchase it online, then let Travelspan Shop and Ship take care of the rest. Travelspan is now offering a shop and ship program to Guyana and Trinidad. Cheap rates plus tracking and multiple offices in Georgetown, West Coast Demerara, and Berbice to take care of your package. Treat yourself and ship your Christmas gifts early this year. In Guyana, 227-1701, and in New York, call 347-238-2201. That's 227-1701. And in New York, 347-238-2201. Let Travelspan and Globespan take care of your online shopping and shipping.
Okay, good. That's good.
Welcome back to our program. We're having a lively discussion here with the Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly, Mr. Manzoor Nadir, and of course, Chairman of ANOG, Mr. Timothy Jonas, with Dr. Rose. Gentlemen, we covered Parliament, we talked about constitutional reform, and there's so much more to be discussed, but we want to move on with good governance. I know we started this program before the speaker came on, and Mr. Jonas mentioned one area where we can start with good governance, and that is having independent board of directors and independent commissions. Mr. Speaker, you mentioned that, or you or Mr. Jonas mentioned it, that we can do that with an act of parliament. Mr. Jonas mentioned that. How can we put this in place to have boards that are independent? The Police Service Commission independent, the Public Service Commission independent. On paper, they're supposed to be independent, but they're not. We know that. We live in Guyana. How can we make that strong and independent and take it away from the politicians? Tim, maybe we can start with you.
Well, the model that ANOG has been proposing all along doesn't take it away from the politicians. If you try to bureaucratize this thing, all you will do is obscure the fact that the politicians retain control. We have some boards that come up now, they get some representative from the trade union and some representative from the university and some representative from here and there. And at the end of the day, when you put all 50 of them in a room, the politicians have still ensured that they control the majority by putting their friends from each of those institutions. It doesn't work. We need simplicity. And a board doesn't need more than 5 or 7. And if it's got 5 or 7, if it's got 7, you invite the leader of the opposition to nominate 3. And you invite your third party, the party with the third largest votes, to nominate 1. So that you always have an equal balance that is representative of the entire Guyana population. And when that happens, and there's a change of government, there's not a change of the board, because the person who was president yesterday and becomes leader of the opposition tomorrow can still only put 3. And the person who was leader of the opposition and becomes president can still only put 3. That board remains the same. And therefore, the management hired by the board, the policies of the board, the undertakings of the board become continuous, become informed and transparent to everybody. Manzoor has personal experience of the trauma that happens when there's a change in government, loss of jobs, loss of work, and all because of politics and political perception. People of high competence that lose their jobs. We're seeing it right now. We saw it 5 years ago. That would not happen if the Gaisuko board had 3 representatives from the opposition on it. It would not happen if the Central Housing Board had 3 members of the opposition on it, because that board would have remained the same. And therefore, the CEO that they appointed would not have changed. His deputy would not have changed. Their management would not have changed. And their policies would have continuity. There would be security. Foreign investors would be encouraged to come because there would be reliability in the system. And you would hire professionals. That's the first thing that needs to be done. And that's where the purse strings are. So it's important.
Mr. Speaker? You're muted, sir. You're muted.
I have some other views, The first being that the government should reduce its involvement in going concerns. The production of goods and services for the people, I still share the strong view that should be left to the market system to allocate those scarce resources and let the private sector invest their money, take their risks, name their boards. So we should continue to evolve a system where there is less government in business. The second issue is we are moving towards a system where those entities that have to have the political involvement of the powers of the day to have some amount of professionalism in them. When you look at the National Procurement and Tender Administration, it has to come out of the National Assembly. And so that board that took so long to put in place, because you have to be able to bring consensus among opposing views. That board has just expired, it has to come back to the National Assembly. So we've seen a few instances. Public Service Commission, Police Service Commission, and those in countries with longer history in the Westminster system have professionals and professional public servants in them. And so when governments change, by and large, they remain the same. And so the people in Ottawa who are holding all the bureaucratic positions, they tell you, so look, when you go to the Hill, those guys are in transition. We're the permanent people. We are the permanent people. It's going to take some time. It's going to take the agitating, the advocacy, and the strong will of principled people to make those changes. But it will happen. I'm confident it will happen. We've seen the trend. We've seen the trend in the last 20 years that change has happened. When we change a constitution to have the leader of the opposition agreeing with the president for the nomination of the chancellor. Why do you think we haven't had a chancellor appointed since the last official chancellor? Carl Singh acted chancellor. Every other person holding the position has been acting. Why? Because the constitution was changed to give equal powers to the president and the leader of the opposition in that appointment. Equal powers. And so sometimes the equality could bring uncertainty. So we are in a system that we have many examples of moving in the direction of Parliament getting the power and professionals being appointed, but still we have the logjam because of how we exercise that power based on partisan political interests.
Dr. Rose, we are getting to program time, so you have the last question for these two gentlemen.
Okay, going back to good governance. The hallmark of good governance is accountability, transparency, promotion or recognition of individual rights, freedom of the press, and so forth. But let's deal with the first two, accountability and transparency. Mr. Jonas and Mr. Speaker, do you think in the first 100 days of this government, which I think was last week, we had good governance? And if so, you think it will continue, Mr. Jonas?
Asquith, we've had energy, we've had dynamism, we've had a very positive outlook, but we haven't had change. We haven't had a meaningful change. You talk about transparency. I want to give you two examples. Calvin Heath London is accused of using a APNU-controlled board of NISIL to get rid of NISIL lands. Could be done because there was nobody from the PPP on the board. Before him, his predecessor, Winston Brassington, was accused of doing exactly the same thing. We're a PPP-controlled board of NISIL. He was accused of getting rid of lands wrongly. And yet, this go round, you see exactly the same thing, that a PPP supporter is put in to run the show under PPP board so that there is no transparency again. The system hasn't changed. There's been no reaching out to say, this is how we are going to do it transparently. It's the same secret deals behind closed doors with your family and your friends and your cronies. So with all the buoyancy and all the optimism, unless you have a meaningful systemic change where those people that you don't like are there making decisions and seeing you make the decisions, there's no transparency. And there will be the rot, there will be the ugliness, there will be the acrimony. Now, I like Manzoor's example. He says there's progress, but respectfully, I don't agree with him. And I'll take his example. After APNU and PPP, who have the monopoly on our political environment, had a clash, and APNU used their street strength to force PPP to talk about constitutional reform, when they had tear gas on the roads and all of that. The two of them started to quibble, and look what they came up with. Look at the example. The two of them said both of them must have a say in appointing our judges. And that is reform. That is what we want. We want our politicians to be dictating who our judges must be, just as our politicians in government can dictate what Parliament does. That's not a Westminster system. That's not separation of powers. But that is the example that Manzoor has given you. Unless we have transparency and unless we have a system that the right people get into the right jobs representing all Guyanese, no matter what you look like, no matter who's in government, we are at square one. And right now we continue to be at square one.
Mr. Speaker.
Your mute is on.
I would say that any government with such a slim majority would want to ensure that it could bring the best of good governance during its term, if that government wants to build on that democracy. So there is a lesson from around the world with respect to the correlation with good government, good governance, and re-election. And I leave it at that. I want to also say that, again, don't let's beat up on ourselves. Don't let's beat 50 years of us moving from the days when the British said on the plantation, and these are written in the words from the governor back to Whitehall. If you go through some of the writings of history, the governor saying, if some things happen on the plantation and I'm attacked by Kwashi, I can expect Sami to defend me. And if I am attacked by Sami, I could expect Kwashi to defend me. So we're coming out of that. We're coming from a long history. Geography, cultures, and a lot of other issues have continued to keep us deeply divided. We who now hold the reins of power, we have in our hands the task of propagating civility and respect for humanity. I see this as a challenge and a challenge for good governance.
One last question from me here. Now, given the population, the dynamics of the population in Guyana, between Indians and blacks, the two major parties, and the Amerindians, which is a strong third force, it is actually believed by political scientists that in 2025, none of the two major parties will be able to garner a majority of votes in Parliament unless the ruling party now switch over and get some of the votes, some of the Afro-Guyanese votes, and not votes from other areas. Based on its own Indian-based support, it will not be able to win a majority in Guyana, because 40% of the population is 60% of the population is actually under 30 years old, and the youths are seeing it different. In 2015, APNU won the election by 4,506 votes. In this election here, the PP won by about 8,000 votes. Some people say the PP won by 15,000 votes, but the PP had 15,000 votes more than APNU. But when you take into consideration APNU's 270,000 votes, plus the 8,000 votes garnered by the third parties, put it at 225, the PP had 233 votes. So it barely won again a majority, one seat. Now, Mr. Jonas and Mr. Speaker, what do you think this government will have to do in order to increase its voting population in Guyana? Its support base.
Well, let me not prescribe for this government, but I'll tell you, a lot of what is repeated by social scientists, they make it sound as if these are newfound phenomena that exist. A.C. Green wrote in 1968 of the same thing, 1968, when he looked at the population demographics and he had identified what he called a zone of creolization at 28%. 1968, 52 years ago, almost 2 generations, right? You've seen an increase in that zone of creolization. The mixed race in our country has gone up. Maybe it's 35%, but since A.C. Green measured it in 1968, I have not seen any other literature in the social sciences on our demographics that says much differently. I raise that because we make a lot about the issue of Indo and Afro, when in fact, if we go back to 1968, the zone of creolization at 28% was almost equal to the other groups. So for me, yes, you may have patterns in people that look Indo-Guyanese or look Afro-Guyanese, but that important group of creolization and the unique features of our indigenous people, a growing population, is going to make, those are the issues that's going to make it tight for any government who wants to impose things on people. And if a government wants to secure itself for this election that's coming and the next one and the next one, good governance, accountability, and transparency will have to be hallmarks of that administration.
You're right in that sense, because what people don't understand is that the Indian population in Guyana has decreased now from 380,000 to about 340,000. Blacks are about 230,000. But the most growing population in Guyana is the mixed race. It's 146,000 mixed race voters you have in Guyana today. And that is creating havoc within both parties. And that's where I think Timothy Jonas and our party comes in to tap into those mixed race votes, and maybe can squeak in a balance of power. Tim, what have you got to say?
And gentlemen, Tim, before you go on, we come at closing time now. So if you answer the question, and then we'll close off today's program. Thanks.
Sure. Your 8,000 votes that you're talking about there, Asquith, the 8,000 margin, represents less than 5% of the votes. So when you go back to Manzoor's comment about nuisance parties, imagine what a tiny nuisance party can do with 5% of the votes in Guyana in terms of creating an independent parliament. I think that's what's going to happen. It's not correct and it's not honest to say to Guyanese, oh, don't worry with this race voting pattern, because we vote race. When I counted the votes at Beirut, when we were counting at the conference center there, 4 votes for one party out of the hundreds and hundreds of people voting in that village. And that is repeated village to village to village. That's how we vote. But you're right, it's on a knife's edge. And the nuisance, and again, although you talk about mixed race, there are a lot of people who identify with a party, even though they may be mixed. And I find that has been more so in the Afro community. That even if you're mixed, a lot of mixed folk identify Afro, I do. So it's not as clear cut that way. But that nuisance value I think is going to resonate in 5 years. I think we will have an independent parliament.
Gentlemen,
Last word, Mr. Speaker.
I don't know, but independent, I think he's more talking about a minority government and a parliament with many sides. I think we could be in that, could be heading in that direction. But to Timothy and all the other parties, the history has been the party that comes up as a third force secures at least about 10%. To secure 5%, you're working for 4 seats. And if you guarantee yourself 4 seats, you guarantee controlling the reins of power over the 2 other parties. I want to say thank you to Globespan for having me again on your program, and it was an honor. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Doc. Thank you, Timothy. And thank you, viewers.
You're welcome.
Pleasure as always, Manzoor. Asquith, Charles, thank you very much.
And gentlemen, we want to thank you guys for taking the evening to be with us, and to our audience out there, thank you so much for being part of the program tonight. Dr. Rose, thank you for being part of the program, and to Nohar Singh and to Devin, thank you so much. Don't forget, guys, if you're booking flights to Guyana, please do it through Globespan. God bless you, and God bless our great country of Guyana.
Take care.
And Mr. Speaker, Mr. Jonas, remember to come back.